Welcome back everybody to another video. Today we're going to be covering all best practice for peeking in Valorant. I've got a bit of a list to go through, so I'm going to jump in pretty quickly. I'm not going to be covering a lot of specifics for different characters or anything like that, because there are a few different variances, and I'm not going to cover how different roles should be peeking. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, so to start it all off, it's really important to know, or to decide, what type of peek you need to do. And for that you need to identify why you're peeking. There's two main reasons for peeking. The first one is to gather information, to figure out where people are. These kind of peeks are usually done with knives out instead of guns. They're pretty straightforward though. For example, there's the jiggle peek, which is you usually hold quite close to the, quite far away from the angle. I'm mixing up my peeks here. And you do a little jiggle peek, get the information, see where they are, and then you can get ready to actually use your gun out. You can also, there's a variation of this where you do it with your gun out as well, and we're going to cover that later. The second kind of information peek is the jump spotting. That's when you get close to your angle and you jump and look away. Now usually you don't get enough information on your actual screen. The important part is the map, because even though these are all people on my team technically, so they'll show on the map anyway. When you do this, when you can't see them, your map line of sight still spots them, and you can see a flash of their icon on the map, and you get an idea of where they are. So that's jump spotting. The last one is called throwing shoulder or shoulder peeking. There's a few different names for this one, but the gist of it is basically you hold real tight to the angle, and you just put your shoulder out a little bit, and then you come back. Now, you want to do this one when they know where you are, or know where you're coming from, and you want to find out generally where they are. It's not super specific though. So what this is going to do is it's going to bait them into shooting you. This is also really good against operators. This is the only kind of peek I really do against operators, because they're going to fire as soon as they see your shoulder, but you're not actually going to move into their crosshair. So you can bait their attack, and then for operators in particular, they're going to be stuck in their animation, so you can just easily pop out, fire at them before they can fire back. The other reason you're going to be peeking is to take a gunfight. Now we're going to go over that in a lot more detail than the information gathering peeks. There's a ton of information out there on how to jiggle peek, how to jump spot, and how to throw shoulder, but they're all pretty straightforward, and you guys can go track those down elsewhere. On our approach, we're going to have to make a lot of different decisions and keep a lot of things in mind. For starters, there is something we have to decide in terms of what type of gunfight peek we're going to do. Your main options are jiggle peeking, which I mentioned earlier. This one you do with your gun out. So you're going to be a little slower, but you're going to peek out, fire, peek back in. Now, if you get really good at counter strafing, you can do this very quickly. I am not that good at counter strafing, so I can't do it as fast, but that's the gist of it. You get a real nice, usually one, maybe two shots off before you hide, and it's really hard for the enemy to react, especially because you have what's called peeker's advantage, which basically the gist of it is when you peek, you see them on your screen faster than they see you, as long as you're peeking from far enough away from the angle. Jiggle peeks you want to do as far away as possible when you do these, because otherwise, if you try to jiggle peek from here, that Sage right in front of me can already see my shoulder, and I can't see her at all. So doing this jiggle peek is gonna give her the advantage of being further away from the wall. Whereas if I come back here, we're on a lot more of an even playing field with this peek here. You're always gonna wanna make sure that you jiggle peek far away from the angle as possible. Now the second kind of gunfight swing is the wide swing. So this is when you're gonna be usually close to an angle. It's good to do this like after a shoulder peek or something like that, or if you have a teammate that's going to swing with you with a double swing. So for the wide swing, you're going to come right up to your angle, and you're going to step out as far as possible. Well, not as far as possible, but you're going to take a few steps out so that you're going beyond where their crosshair is holding, and they're going to have to adjust to hit you. You're only going to want to do this when you know that you've got like a 1v1. Some agents can do this against more opponents, but that's like your Jet, your Reyna, someone who can get a kill and immediately get out. But in general, you're going to want to do this when you know you have an isolated 1v1, and you can just wide swing, fire, and you're good to go. And I briefly mentioned double swinging. Usually that entails one person wide swinging and the second person doing more of a jiggle peek, or more of a short swing. So that way you offset yourself. For example, I'd be standing here, my friend would be standing here. We can get a kill. If the wide swinger dies, that's honestly okay. You're going to get that trade at the very least because you have your second person there. It's vital not to peek exactly at the same time, one in front of the other, because you open up the enemies to get a collat, or to just get a lucky spray. Alright, so moving on to our standard peek. This is where you're going to be wanting to kind of slowly move. You're taking one fight at a time. So I'm going to go over step by step every single thing you have to do and every decision you have to make when standard peeking. So the first thing you want to do when you decide that you're going to do a standard peek is you're going to want to make sure that your crosshair is head level. So for example, you can see here, if I move on the horizontal plane, I hit this sage in the head, and anyone who pops up here, I'm going to be shooting in the head. So I want to make sure I keep my crosshair at head level when I make my peeks. So this way you move in already prepared to shoot her in the face. Now, a lot of people, especially at lower elos, they make the mistake of looking at the ground or trying to basically use the more empty area of their screen to see things. But then you have to make a really big correction, and you don't want to do that. But this is pretty standard. Everyone tells you, keep your crosshair at head level. What doesn't come up as often about your crosshair is keeping it at about the same pace as your movement. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to have your crosshair here and your movement be peaking that angle. See how my crosshair is so far away from where the sage actually is? Now this is an extreme example, but a lot of the times it's even just as bad as this, right? This means that your crosshair, your aim, is lagging behind your movement. So you need to either slow your movement down or speed up how much you are moving your crosshair, because you don't want to be peeking against that and have to move. She's got a free kill against you if you do that. Now typically, another thing you don't want to do is you don't want to keep your crosshair on the angle at all times. Now sometimes you have to if you think someone's going to be right next to you and you have to kind of be ready for that. But generally speaking, you're going to want to pre-aim. So you can see here, I'm moving out, and as soon as I can see her, my crosshair is already on her. That's pre-aiming. I am getting ready ahead of time, and I don't actually have to move my crosshair at all, which makes it really efficient to just peek, get your kill, and get out. All you have to do is worry about strafing. Alright, so now that you know what you need to do with your crosshair, the next thing you have to think about is where is the enemy going to be? So essentially, you need to identify all the common angles that the enemy will hold from. I've got most of them for a site of ascent kind of plotted out here. So this one's really common. Behind this box, behind these boxes is a little less common, but it happens. Behind that box, again, a little less common, but high movement characters will use it. Behind this wall here, and around generator. I put them here. They also sometimes peek out here, but I didn't want to, lag the game too hard by having too many people. This is just a custom game after all. So basically, in your mind, you're going to imagine that there is going to be someone there. You're not going to think, oh, there might be someone there. In your mind, you know someone is there. That way you're ready for it. So you're going to be swinging and you're going to be shooting already because you know they're there. Even if they're not, at least you get the shots off, right? There's no harm in firing at a wall when you have the chance of firing at the enemy instead. You're going to want to convince yourself that all these positions are filled. Always go worst case scenario. Now, once you have this all mapped out in your brain, you need to figure out how to peek in such a way where you're only peeking one angle at a time. So for example, I peek this sage, only this sage can see me right now. None of the other ones have eyes on me. After I get that kill, I'm going to be making sure that I can only be seen by this sage peeking here. This one can't see me, this one can't see me, etc, etc. And once I get that one, that angle taken care of, I swing for top. I take that shot as necessary, and sure, there's a small chance someone peeks here, but that's really an uncommon spot for people to hold. But you take this person out, no one else can see you. You swing a little further, take them out, swing a little further, take them out, and swing a little further and take them out. This way, you have 1v1s, even though this is technically, well, this setup here is a 6v1, but even though this could be like a 5v1 or a 3v1 against you, you're taking them as 1v1s. So unless two people are holding one angle, you have a way higher odds of taking care of everything. And this keeps you very safe, as opposed to, for example, if you tried to wide swing this, already 4 of them have seen me. She's probably seeing my shoulder from here. It's just a bad time. Or if you, even worst case scenario, come out here, everyone knows where you are, they're going to be shooting at you. There is no way around that. So you're going to want to isolate your 1v1s here. Now I will say, there are some times where 1v1s are impossible or very difficult to isolate. In those cases, for example, it happens a little bit here, but smoking off this area here is going to protect you from that angle. The prime example is on Haven. The Heaven window of a site is really hard to play against, because anytime you try to isolate a 1v1, window is just up there, ready to see you. So in those cases, you're going to want to use things like smokes, walls, mollies, or worst case scenario is if you don't have any of your util up, you can just do your double peek that I mentioned earlier, have one person swing wide, one person swing short, and you can peek both angles at the same time and be ready to get the trade. Alright, so now that you kind of have a good idea of how to peek and isolate your 1v1s, I want to go over some key factors about the more minute details. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, whenever you peek an angle, using a standard peek, you're going to want to stay as far away as possible. This makes sure that when you peek, you don't give them advantage, right? So again, if I hold right here, even though I can't see the sage, she can see my entire right half of my body, which is obviously not good. Even she could see it, right? So by going close, even if I just swing out and take this fight, now that sage can see me, that sage can see me, that sage can see me, and I'm just going to get immediately annihilated. Another thing to keep in mind is you don't want to use your W key when you're peeking angles. You need to use your strafe keys. Now this is really important, so you don't want to kind of peek like this. You see how I'm moving diagonally? I'm moving with that kind of arch. You don't want to do that because you displace yourself less on the enemy screen. So in 1 second of doing that, I move much less distance than moving like this. So you don't want to be peeking your angles with W key. Think of it like this. When you use your W key, some of your movement is spent walking straight towards the enemy, and some of your movement is at the diagonal, right? Or parallel. The reason this is so bad is, for example, if your enemy is standing here and you start just walking straight towards them, that's an easy kill. If you start swinging directly left to right for them, they have to adjust their crosshair. That you move much faster that way than if you walk a little bit forward and a little bit to the side. So basically, when you're peeking these angles, don't touch your W key, just use your strafe keys. And the other bonus of this is it builds up a good habit for down the line when you want to start learning counter strafing, which there's a million other videos about, so I'm not going to go over that. I'm not even that good at it, so I'm not going to cover it. Another key thing to think about when you're doing your strafes to take your little 1v1s is you don't want to hold shift and do this peek, because I'm moving so much slower and they have a lot more time to react. Whereas if I pop out like that, you see I'm there very quickly, they can't react, you use your peeker's advantage, and you get the kill. Now, for those of you who don't know, you're probably screaming, well, I need to be quiet, my footsteps will be heard. But if you only take one or two steps with your strafe keys, you don't actually make a sound. So listen here. But if I go a little too far and I take that extra little step, See how you can hear that little bit of a step? So it doesn't actually kick in until like a second into your movement. So you can use that to your advantage to say, peek here, you're still quiet. Peek here, you're still quiet. Peek here, still quiet. Peek here, still quiet. Haven't made a single sound this entire time. So you can just do these little peeks, and every single time you're not making an actual step. So your enemy's not going to actually know where you are, and you get to move fast. So that's something you want to keep in mind. The other nice thing about doing the two-step peeks is that it limits how much you can move without making sound, so thus you're gonna be only taking a couple steps and only exposing yourself to less angles. Whereas if I didn't care about that, if I didn't care about taking just a couple steps, I'd be rotating like way out into multiple angles at a time, right? So it's a bit of a trick to A, make sure you're taking less angles at a time, and B, to still be quiet. You get two advantages there. Another thing to keep in mind is elevation changes while you're trying to pre-aim. So for example, I peek here, right? Get that kill. If I try to just peek and shoot with the same head level, this is going to be a leg or a body shot on this stage, right? So you need to keep in mind when the elevation changes, and you're going to have to account for that with your aim. So you're going to have to aim just a little bit higher. Now, here's a little trick for you guys. If you don't know, say you're in like a 1v1 scenario, you know that the enemy is up on the ledge, but you don't know where to put your crosshair. Take out your minimap, ping where the enemy was, and now you can use that as a point of reference for where the ground is, and you can aim just a little bit higher. It gives you a much better idea as opposed to going in mostly blind, right? So at least you can get closer to a body or a headshot than just turning and firing at legs or aiming too high and missing entirely. So that's a little trick for you. The other time you want to use the ping is, say you have spike planted, you have it smoked off, and the enemy starts defusing it, you hear it. If it's pinged, which your team should always be pinging it for you when they're dead, or you can ping it yourself. So you ping it, that way you know where spike is, and even though it's in a smoke, you can peek and shoot the person that's standing there. Alright, so let's imagine we're in a 1v1 scenario with this sage right here, okay? So if I do my peek and I miss, and I go back into cover, what you don't want to do is do the exact same thing again. That's very predictable, and not only in this particular situation, you can see me peeking this angle. From her perspective, I can only be in one place. I can only be there. I can't move. I can't go far, right? Whereas with her, she could be still standing where she was. She could have moved over here. She could have moved over here. She could be back behind there. She has such a huge advantage of knowing exactly where you're going to be, and you have no idea where she's going to be. You know she's on site, and that's it. So you don't want to peek, miss, or get one kill and not the other, hide, and then do the exact same peek again. You need to switch it up. Now, ideally, you're going to switch it up by using a character with a flash or a molly, smokes, anything like that, that you can change up the scenario and give yourself the advantage back again. Obviously, blinds are ideal. Then that's exactly what you want to do. So for example here, I'd throw my flash, I'd peek, I'd get the kill, or I'd smoke off, say, this entire side. She can't go there anymore. That way you know she's going to be there, there, there. Kind of cuts things off a little bit more. If you've got like Viper walls, you can give yourself a much better advantage. It's just, you don't want to be the predictable guy that peeks, fires, hides, peeks, fires, hides, peeks, fires, hides. Don't want to do that. The other option, if you don't have any util, is to, for example, peek with a buddy and do the double peek, right? That we just mentioned before. That's a great way to change it up, surprise them a little bit. Or, if they're using something like an op that's going to take more time, give them a shoulder throw and then peek them. Or, for example, even if they're using a Vandal, you give them a little shoulder throw, they're not going to expect an immediate wide swing off of that. And not only that, but a little shoulder peek, you're going to get a really good idea of where they are on the site, a lot better than if you just peeked from way back here, one try, that kind of thing. So you can either mix it up by using utility, using a teammate, or using one of the other previously mentioned peeks. Those are the best ways to do it. Now, in a perfect world, obviously this site is not a good example of it, but in a perfect world, you can get your one peek, you can duck back away, and then you can reposition entirely. That way they have no idea where you're going to come from. So for example, if I'm holding, say, this angle here, and I do my peek and I miss, I'm going to rotate, I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to peek this new angle, right? Something along those lines. Obviously that one's a little bit more anticipated, but along those lines is great. You want to reposition whenever possible, throw the enemy off, make them unable to expect what you're doing. You've got to be unpredictable in games like this. So the main takeaways of this video is to peek with your crosshair placement on head level and pre-aiming your shot. That way you can be ready to actually get the headshot, get the kill. The other main takeaway is to do your 2 steps as opposed to crouch or shift walking. That's really ineffective. You're going to lose so many fights if you shift walk. I'd say one of the biggest takeaways that you should have here is do not peek holding W. Use your strafe keys A and D. Those are going to be your best way to get your advantage fully taken. And lastly, the other big point is to not do the same peeks over and over again. You need to switch things up. You need to keep the enemies on their toes. Otherwise, you become predictable and you're an easy kill. One thing I will also throw in, because I forgot to do it earlier, is especially in lower ranks, don't commit to a crouch peek. That's not ideal. 90% of the time, especially in lower elos, people are aiming at the body level. They're not aiming at head level a lot of the time. So when you crouch, you're just putting your head right in the crosshair. Not only that, but you're also super slow and you're really committed to taking that gunfight, and you have to win it, otherwise you're pretty much dead. Otherwise, avoid crouching. Only crouch if you know your crosshair is on them. Typically, the ideal gunfight scenario is going to be a fire, a strafe, a fire, a strafe, a fire, a strafe. If you know your crosshair is on their head, that's when you crouch and commit to it. That was an awful spray control, but we're not going to talk about it. So yeah, that does it for this video. All about peeking and how you should approach and the kind of decisions you need to make. I hope this was a helpful video for all of you. If there's anything you'd like to add, let me know down in the comments section. These videos are less of a, hey, look at me, I know stuff, and more of a, I want to start conversation. So by all means, have conversation down in the comments section. I will be absolutely checking my comments, and I'd love to see you down there. Without further ado, have a lovely rest of your day, evening, morning, afternoon, and night. Bye-bye.